Hello everyone, welcome back to yet another episode on income tax. And today we will discuss judicial update for your November or December 2020 as well as 21 examination for CA or CMA finals. Okay, so let's start with the important judicial updates. So these series of videos are done in two parts. This is actually part 1. So before getting into this case laws, let me tell you one important thing. While studying a case law, you need to split it into 4 parts. Part number 1, the circumstance of the case. Part number 2, what exactly is the debate. Part number 3, the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act 1961. And part number 4, the judgment. It is not about the name and judgment. Okay, so 4 things you have to be very clear. Circumstance, debatable point, then relevant provisions of the act as well as the judgment. So we will discuss the entire case laws in these 4 parts. So starting with the first case law, it is called Shishay Steels Private Limited, or you can pronounce it as Shishay Steels Private Limited according to you, but be careful about the spelling. Okay, and 2020 judge case law by the Supreme Court. The judgment was issued in 2020. So it makes this case law very, very important. Starting with the assessee was the owner of a land. Okay, he entered into an agreement with a builder. The agreement was dated on 15th May 1998. The assessee, according to the agreement, based on that agreement, assessee gave permission to start construction on that particular land. So assessee gave permission to the builder to start what? Construction on the land. And a power of attorney, POA means power of attorney, was also given to the builder to execute sales deed on completion of building. Once building is completed, the building has the right to sell that particular building he constructed. So power of attorney was also given to the builder. It is just like a joint development. Okay. Later on, due to some disputes, the agreement could not be executed, and a compromise deed was executed between the parties. Later on, there was a dispute, so the agreement was not able to be implemented. They entered into a compromise deed. And these are the terms of compromise deed. The compromise deed dated 19th July 2003. According to the compromise deed, assessee will issue a discharge certificate on the property only after receiving sale consideration from the builder. Rather than joint development, the assessee is ready to give off his rights on that particular land, but only on receipt of what? Sale consideration from the builder. Okay, that was the main point in the compromise deed. And the builder also agreed to it. And the builder agreed to make payment by post-dated checks. And the last check was dated on January 25th, 2004. That means in the previous year, 2004, 2005 itself, the builder was ready to give the entire payment on that particular land. And the assessee will give off or waive off his right in that particular land. This was the crux of that particular compromise deed. Got my point? Again, and the assessee did not file return of income in the assessment year 2004-5. That means in the previous year 2003-4. Assessee did not file his return and didn't pay any taxes on capital gains. The department's contention was it is a transfer and capital gains should be paid. So the department issued a notice against the assessee under 148 for initiating reassessment or income escapement proceedings. Okay, and the assessee, there was no response from the assessee side, so the department finally conducted it as a best judgment assessment. Okay, best judgment assessment, because the assessee was not cooperating. So once the assessee is not cooperating to any assessment proceedings, then the department will definitely invoke best judgment assessment. Completed their assessment one-sided and passed an order against the assessee. Okay, and what happened is like the assessee objected to the levy of capital gain. Once that particular order comes in, the assessee raised his objection. He objected to that capital gain. In the assessment year 2004-5, his contention was it is not taxable in assessment year 2004-5. And he objected the 144 best judgment assessment order as well. That was the contention of assessee. He was completely objecting to that particular assessment order. Okay. And moving forward, now the debate. The debate was, assessee's contention was this is not a transfer in assessment year 2004-5. That was the assessee's contention. But the department says it is a transfer. You need to pay what? capital gain or taxes on that capital gain. That was a contention of department. So this is the debate, whether it is a transfer or not, whether that compromise deed will amount to a transfer or not. That is the debatable point. So before moving on to the judgment, let's understand the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act 1961. Under section 2 clause 47 subclause 5, any transaction involving allowing of possession of any immovable property to be taken or retained in part performance of a contract referred under Transfer of Properties Act 1882. According to Transfer of Properties Act, an immovable property's title will be transferred only on its deed, registration, etc., right? But section 2 clause 47 states, for calling it as a transfer, you need not completely do a transfer according to Transfer of Properties Act. Rather, if a transaction involves allowing of possession of any immovable property to some other person, if you are transferring that possession alone, it can be called as a transfer. This is what subclause 5 is all about. And subclause 6, it says, any transaction, whether by way of an agreement or arrangement, which has an effect of enabling or enjoying or transferring the enjoyment of an immovable property, any immovable property, can also be called as a transfer. And if you are also transferring or you are enabling the enjoyment of any immovable property to some other person, then it can also be called as a transfer. So these are the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act. Now let's understand the judgment. The judgment Supreme Court says that in this case, the assessee's right in the said immovable property were extinguished on receipt of the last check, right? So once the compromise is according to the compromise deed, whenever the assessee receives that last check, he will completely waive off his rights in that particular land. Okay. And as also that the compromise deed could be stated to be a transaction which had the effect of transferring the immovable property in question. So according to that compromise deed, assessee is actually giving his right or possession in that immovable property in that land to the builder. And hence it is a transfer in relation to the capital asset, and capital gains taxability would be attracted. And this was the judgment, and this judgment was against assessee in favor of department, because according to the Supreme Court, this can be called as a transfer. Again, there is one more thing. Supreme Court took note of the following decision in the case of Balbir Singh Maini, which was cited in 2018, and it says, even though title is not transferred, any transaction which enables the enjoyment of immovable property can be called as a transfer. This was the judgment in the case of Balbir Singh Maini. So while citing Shishe Steels Private Limited, Supreme Court took a note of that case as well. So ultimately, this case was in favor of department. Okay, so that is the first case law. And moving forward with the second case law, it is Arham Softronics, cited in 2019, again by the Supreme Court. So before moving on to this case law, let's understand the relevant provisions of the Act, then only we will discuss the case law. The relevant provisions of the Act, it is all about section 80IC, which allows tax holiday to the undertaking which manufacture or produce a specified article or a thing or an existing undertaking on their substantial expansion in the state of Himachal Pradesh and Uttaranchal. If you are initiating, or if you are starting or commencing a particular manufacturing unit in the state of Himachal Pradesh or Uttaranchal, or if you are an existing entity, then on a substantial expansion as well, you will be able to claim a deduction under 80IC. So two things. If you are in the state of Himachal Pradesh or Uttaranchal, either you can commence a new manufacturing specified article business, or you have another option. If you are an existing entity, you can do a substantial expansion as well. If you are willing to do a substantial expansion, then also you will get the benefit of 80IC. Okay. And substantial expansion means increase in the investment in plant and machinery by at least 50% of the book value of the plant and machinery, as on the first day of the previous year in which the substantial expansion is undertaken. Simply, substantial expansion means what? You are an existing entity and you need to increase your plant and machinery by at least 50% or more to be called as a substantial expansion. Okay, so if you are an existing entity on substantial expansion, you can claim a deduction under 80IC. That's what the 80IC is all about. Now, what is the deduction? That it will be a tax holiday will be 100% for the first 5 assessment years and 25% for the next 5 assessment years. It simply means if you are an eligible assessee under 80IC, then what you can claim? You can claim tax holiday as 100% of deduction from that particular business. Whatever be the profit, you can claim 100% as a deduction for the first 5 years. And for the next 5 years, what happens? It is either 25% of your profits, or if you are SSE being a company, then it is 30% of your profits. So this is what 80IC is all about. Okay. So two things: substantial expansion or commencement of a manufacturing, either in the state of Himachal Pradesh or Uttaranchal. It have to be a specified manufacturer, not all manufacturers. If you are manufacturing or producing a specified article, you will be eligible to claim 80IC. And what is 80IC? For the first 5 years, 100% deduction. For the next 5 years, either 25%, or being a company SSE, you can claim 30%. Right? And there is one more point. Under 80IC clause 6, no deduction shall be allowed to any undertaking or enterprise under this section where the total period of deduction exceeds 10 assessment years. So 80IC also states one more thing: the maximum deduction allowable to an SSE is 10 years, not more than 10 years. So in whatever permutation and combination, the maximum year of deduction will be for 10 years. First 5 years 100%, next 5 years normally 25% or 30% accordingly. So these are the relevant provisions for understanding this particular case law. So let's start with the case law. The SSE started availing exemption under 80IC on setting up a new industrial unit in Himachal Pradesh. So SSE set up a new unit in Himachal Pradesh, which was a specified article manufacturer, and he started claiming 80IC benefit, 100% deduction. For the first 5 years, 100%. As you know, for the first 5 years from the year of commencement, it will be year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, 100% of the profits. Then the next 5 years, that means from 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, for the next 5 years, what he does, normally for the next 5 years, it is either 25% or 30% according to the mode of business by the SSE. But what SSE does from the 6th year, he's carried out a substantial expansion. See, he increased his plant and machinery more than 50%. So it can be called as a substantial expansion, right? He carried out a substantial expansion and started claiming 100% deduction, and the department objected the same. From 6th year to the 10th year, SSE carried out a substantial expansion. And what he does, he started claiming 100% as a deduction. Okay? But the department said, you are an existing entity, have already taken 100% deduction in the first 5 years. On the 6th year, even though you have carried out a substantial expansion, you cannot claim what? 100% deduction again. Maximum deduction is 25% or 30%. This was the contention of department. But the SSE from the 6th year started claiming 100% what? Deduction. Okay. Again, moving on to the Supreme Court observations and judgment. Supreme Court observed that the advantage of this provision also accrues to an existing unit if they carry out a substantial expansion. So Supreme Court says that even if you are a new entity and you claim 100% deduction for the first 5 years, if you are carrying out a substantial expansion in the 6th year, then you can claim what? Again 100% as deduction, no problem. It is also available to existing entities on account of a substantial expansion. That was the first observation of Supreme Court. Again, the Supreme Court held that in this case, a substantial expansion is carried out by the SSE within the aforesaid period of 10 years. And the said previous year in which the substantial expansion is undertaken would become the initial assessment year, and from that assessment year, the SSE shall be entitled to claim 100% of deduction. 100% is a profit as a deduction. So Supreme Court says that from the 6th year onwards, you can claim 100% as deduction rather than 25%. That's what the Supreme Court's judgment. Why? Because SSE has carried out a substantial expansion in 6th year. And one more thing, such a deduction, however, could not be for a period remaining out of, would be for a period remaining out of 10 years as provided in section 80IC subsection 6. It simply noted one more thing. You can claim 100% of your profits as deduction from the 6th year, but for 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, for this 10 year, for these block of 5 years, you can claim 100%. But from the 11th year, don't come and ask 25% of your profits as deduction, because 80IC subsection 6 clearly states that in whatever permutation and combination, maximum deduction available to an SSE under 80IC is for 10 years. So according to the judgment of Supreme Court, SSE year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5 claim 100% because a new manufacturing. 6th year he carried out a substantial expansion. So 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10 again 100%. 11th year, no deduction at all. Why? Because maximum deduction 80 IC subsection 6 will be restricted to 10 years. Hope you got my point, right? So let's carry on with the next case law, that is called Chetak Enterprises Private Limited 2020. Again, Supreme Court decision that makes it very, very, very important, and it was also cited in 2020. So the SSE, being a partnership firm, okay, entered into an agreement with the state government of Rajasthan. SSE was a partnership firm. They have an agreement with the state government of Rajasthan, and entered into an agreement for construction of road and collection of road toll tax. That means the road tax. So SSE was ready to construct a road, and once it is completed, he will collect what? Toll from that particular passengers who was actually using that particular bridge or whatever the road. Okay, so this agreement was made between the SSE and the state government of Rajasthan. So moving forward, the construction of road was completed by the said firm on March 27, 2000. So 27th March 2000, the construction is completed. Okay, so we can say in 99 2000 construction is completed, right? The same was inaugurated on April 1st 2000. So 1st April 2000 the same was inaugurated, and again on March 28 2000 the firm was converted into a private limited company. So on March 28 2000 the firm got converted into a private limited company, and upon conversion an intimation was given. Initially the construction was completed by the partnership firm. So once the construction is completed, the partnership firm has converted themselves into a private limited company. Got my point? And upon conversion, intimation was given to the chief engineer, PWD, who cancelled the registration of the firm and granted a fresh registration card to the SSE company. So initially the agreement was made between the partnership firm and the company. So the partnership firm has the right to collect the toll tax, right? So once that partnership firm converted into a company, they made an agreement. It's just like an alteration with the state government of Rajasthan, and the state government of Rajasthan completely approved it. And now the right to collect the toll or the charges has been given to that particular new company, right? And for assessment year 2002-03, the assessing officer declined the claim of SSE company under ATIA. Now let's understand what exactly is ATIA. ATIA, that means the Relevant Provisions of Income Tax Act 1961. ATIA, it says that SSEs who carries on eligible business, that is infrastructure facility in this case, eligible for 100% deduction of profits from such business for 10 consecutive assessment years. So SSE, if he carries out an eligible infrastructure facility, is eligible for 100% deduction of his profits for 10 consecutive assessment year. This was the benefit in ATIA. For claiming ATIA benefit, the SSE must be an enterprise owned by the company registered in India, and it should have entered into an agreement with the central government or state government or local authority. Got my point? So SSE, if is an enterprise owned by a company, or SSE being a company, can only claim ATIA benefit. That means 10 years 100% profit holiday or tax holiday. Not profit holiday, it is tax holiday. So, and it have to enter an agreement with the state government or central government or local authority. LA means local authority. So this was ATIA provision. And what is the debate here? The debate was whether the conditions under ATIA are fulfilled by the company because initially the construction was carried out by the partnership firm, and the partnership firm made an agreement with the state government of Rajasthan, right? So once this toll collection, once this bridge or road got inaugurated, the partnership firm themselves converted into a company. So the company will start collecting all the toll, right? All the charges. And on these charges, the company had started claiming exemption under ATIA. Hope you got my point. Partnership firm started the construction, then it converted into company for claiming ATIA benefit. So this was the contention by the department, and the department said, you will not get the benefit of ATIA because it is just, you have converted yourself. Initially you are a partnership firm, then you converted into a company for claiming ATIA. So we won't give you the benefit of ATIA. That was the contention of department. But the SSE said, no, we have followed all the conditions mentioned under ATIA, so we are eligible. That was the condition of SSE. Got my point? And again, the Supreme Court observations and judgment. So Supreme Court observed that after conversion, all the properties of the firm was taken over by the company. Once it converted, all the properties of the firm is taken over by the company. When the partnership firm is converted into a company, the state government had granted sanction to the company, and the original agreement entered into with the firm automatically stood converted in favor of the assessee company. Once the conversion has become effective, then what happened? The state government then enter a new agreement with the company, and the state government has given complete right to the newly converted company. The state government themselves recognize that newly converted company, right? And that's why the Supreme Court held that the assessee company qualified for deduction under 80IA. Why? Because according to 80IA, what all are the conditions? The condition should be the enterprise should be owned by that particular any company, right? Enterprise who's building the road should be owned by a company. So the partnership firm built the road and they themselves converted into a company. And once after conversion, they have made a new agreement with the state government as well. So all the conditions of 80IA has been satisfied. That's why Supreme Court held that even though there is a conversion, partnership firm converted themselves into a company, they are eligible for 80IA deduction. That's what the contention of Supreme Court, and this judgment is completely in favor of assessee. Got my point? So let's move on to the next case law, that is called Genpact India Private Limited, 2019. Cited by the Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court of India. Let's understand this case. The assessee bought back its own shares. There was a buyback. Filed a return but denied the tax liability on buyback under 115 QA. 115 QA says on buyback taxes, BBT, we will call it as BBT in short, buyback taxes. Assessee denied the buyback taxes. Assessee says there is a buyback, yes, but I won't pay any buyback taxes. That's what the contention of assessee. And the department issued a notice under 143 subsection 2 and passed an order against the assessee. Department issued a notice under 143 subsection 2. What is 143 subsection 2 notice? It is a part of your assessment procedure chapter. 143 subsection 2 notice is for initiating a regular assessment under section 143 subsection 3. For initiating a regular assessment under section 143 subsection 3, department is mandatorily required to issue a notice under 143 subsection 2. Then only they can initiate a regular assessment proceeding. So 143 subsection 2 has been issued and the department has passed an order against the assessee because assessee haven't paid buyback taxes. He has some debates, he has some objections. Now it is not related to whether it is taxable under 115 QA. That is not the debate. Let's continue. The assessee filed a writ petition against the proportion of assessment order. Not proportion, portion of assessment order, sorry. The assessee got agreed by this assessment order, straight away gone and filed a writ petition in the High Court against the department. Okay, and the department submitted that since the remedy of appeal was available to the assessee, the writ petition should not be entertained. That was the contention of department. So this is not about, the debate is not about whether this buyback is subjected to 115 QA taxable or not. That is not the debate. The debate is against the assessment order, assessee filed a writ petition with the High Court. Okay, and department says that assessee can appeal before Commissioner of Income Tax, CITA. Then why he filed a writ petition before High Court? Because the writ is a remedy. So whenever there is no direct remedy in any act, it is just like do or die situation for the assessee, right? So in those situations, assessee can file a writ before High Court. So here against the regular assessment order, assessee can file an appeal before Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. Then why he is moving on with a writ? That was the contention of department, and the department said this writ should be cancelled. Why? Because he can, if he has some objection, he can file an appeal before Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. So this writ is invalid. That was the contention of department. It is a bit complicated, but it is easy. Okay. Again, the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act 1961, it says as per section 246A subsection 1 clause 1A, any assessee aggrieved against the following order may appeal to Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals. An order against the assessee where the assessee denies his liability to be assessed under Income Tax Act. It simply says if as against the assessee there is an order by the department, order issued by the department, and if the assessee has some objections, then straight away he can file his objections before Commissioner of Income Tax Appeals itself. That's what section 246A subsection 1 clause A subclause 1 says about. So there is a direct remedy for the assessee in the Income Tax Act itself. And hence the Supreme Court held that accordingly an appeal under section 246A to commissioner appeals would be maintainable against the determination of liability under 115 QA. The writ petition filed by the SSC is not in order. They've quashed or cancelled that particular, rejected that particular writ petition. So you hope you got the debate in this case. It is very easy. Against that order under 143 subsection 3, SSC straight away went and filed a writ petition before High Court. Okay, so this was challenged. Whether the SSC has right to file writ before High Court. This was challenged by the department in Supreme Court. And Supreme Court cited that an order against 143.3, SSC can file an appeal before Commissioner of Income Tax. So writ is not available to the SSC. Why? Because there is a remedy in Income Tax Act itself. Writ is normally filed whenever there is no remedy in any act. Okay, and hence the Supreme Court said that the writ petition is not maintainable because the SSC has the right to appeal before Commissioner of Income Tax appeals. So that is that particular case law, and let's move on to the next case law, that is called Metal and Chromium Plater Private Limited, 2019, Madras High Court. It's an easy case law. The SSC invested long-term capital gain in eligible redeemable bonds and claimed exemption under 54EC. So if there is a long-term capital gain on transfer of land or building, and if you have invested that particular sale consideration in a 5-year NHAI, that means National Highway Authority of India, or RECL or other specified bonds, then you will be eligible for an exemption up to rupees 50 lakh. That is what section 54EC also is all about. Okay, so the SSC invested his long-term capital gain in a bond which is eligible under 54EC exemption and tax under normal provisions of the act. So SSC claimed exemption while computing taxes under normal provisions of the act. And he does one more thing he did. While computing book profit under 115 JB also, he took the benefit of 54EC. So what he have done, while computing normal provisions of the act, he claimed the benefit of 54EC exemption. It is allowable. But while computing book profit for the purpose of minimum alternative taxes under section 115 JB, from that book profit as well, he started deducting this 54EC exemption. And it was objected by the assessing officer. So the assessing officer did not question the eligibility of SSC to such an exemption in the normal computation. It is allowed. Assessing officer did not object. But for the purpose of computing book profit for determination of minimum alternative taxes under 115 JB, the assessing officer denied relief under 54EC. Because the assessing officer contention is very simple and straight. Under section 115 JB, this particular 54EC is not specifically mentioned. That's why the assessing officer rejected the claim of SSC. Okay, and the High Court observed that the book profit means net profit as adjusted by the items set out in explanation under section 115 JB. So High Court make a note that book profit simply means what? From the net profit, you have to adjust certain items which is explained under section 115 JB. You are not supposed to do anything more or anything less, right? And hence held that the exemption under 54EC should not be taken into account for calculating minimum alternative tax book profit. For computing MAT book profit, you are not supposed to take 54EC benefit. Why? Because it has not been specifically provided in 115 JB. That's what the judgment given by the High Court in the case of Metal and Chromium Plater Limited 2019, and the court is Madras High Court. Okay, so moving forward to the next case law, that is called Maruti Suzuki India Limited 2019 Supreme Court 2019, and it is cited by the Honorable Supreme Court of India. So the SSC company S, so SSC company's name is S, filed its return in 28th October 2012. They filed their return in 28th October 2012. With effect from 1st April 2012, the company S got amalgamated with another company, that means company M. So the company S got amalgamated with company M. So the amalgamated company is M and the amalgamated company is S, right? So intimation was given to the assessing officer about the amalgamation. So the SSC has given an intimation to the assessing officer as well in relation to this amalgamation. So the assessing officer thereafter, after receiving an intimation, issued a notice under 143 subsection 2, again for invoking regular assessment under 143 subsection 3. The assessing officer initiated a notice and initiated proceedings against the company S. So once the amalgamation has completed and the SSC has given an intimation to the assessing officer as well. After all these events, assessing officer issued a notice in the name of amalgamating company, the old company, yes. And company M participated in the same because they have got amalgamated, and the company M, once received the notice, he have participated in the particular proceedings in the same, and final assessment order was passed against S. So the problem here is the notice was in the name of yes. Once M, the amalgamated company, got this notice, the amalgamated company participated in the proceedings, and the proceedings got over, right? Then the company M, the existing company, that means the amalgamated company, new company, M, filed an appeal against the department. They filed an appeal against the department contending that the assessment proceedings were continued in the name of non-existent entity. Yes, got my point? So the assessment notice and the proceedings were in the name of yes, amalgamating company, old company. So M was participated in the proceedings, and thereafter they filed a further appeal stating that the entire order, notice, everything was in the name of a non-existent company. Yes, okay, the company's name is yes, okay. And the final assessment order, which was also made in the name of a non-existent entity, would be invalid. So the contention of M was very clear. This is completely invalid. Why? Because this assessment notice, everything was done in the name of a non-existent company. Yes. So we have no demand, or we have no liability on this particular assessment order. That's what the contention of company M, new company. Okay. Now let's understand the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act 1961. Section 292B, there is a section called 292B. It provides that no return of income or assessment order or notice or summons or other proceedings furnished shall be invalid merely by a reason of any mistake, defect or omission, if they are in substance and in effect in conformity with or according to the intent and purpose of Income Tax Act. Section 292B simply states that if there is some clerical mistake on a particular notice, assessment order or something, then on that clerical mistake, due to that clerical mistake, you cannot make that particular notice or order invalid. Simply it means, say my name is Jose Kurian and the correct spelling is Joskurian. Okay, but for example, the department has issued a notice in the name of Joskurian. So there is a clerical error in this particular notice. Okay, so due to this clerical error alone, I cannot make this notice invalid. That is 292B. It gives a protection. Okay, and again, let's come back to our case law, Supreme Court judgment. So what was the case law? The entire notice was in the name of S. And the proceedings, the company M, new company, attended the proceedings, right? And the new company said that we have no liability on this particular assessment order because it is done in the name of a non-existent company. That was the contention of new company M. So the Supreme Court observed that once amalgamated, the amalgamating company S ceases to exist. Thereafter, it could not be regarded as a person under Section 2, Clause 31. Under 231, you cannot treat that company yes as a person again. Why? Because it is a non-existent company. Once, because amalgamation has already been completed. So the amalgamation got effective prior to the date on which the notice under 143(2) was issued. So even before notice was issued, amalgamation got completed. And information in relation to amalgamation has been initiated to AO as well, and there was an intimation has also been sent by the assessing officer, by the assessee to the assessing officer, right? You remember? So the Supreme Court held that the intimation of assessment proceedings as a non-existent entity was void ab initio, and participation in the proceedings by the amalgamated company M in the circumstance cannot make the proceedings valid as per 292B. So 292B only protects some clerical error or mistakes. So in this case, the entire notice, proceedings or assessment order, everything was conducted against whom? A non-existent company S. Thereafter, amalgamation took place and a new company M has come, right, has initiated, right? So the department issued notice, proceedings, everything in the name of a non-existent company, and in this case they will not get the protection of 292B because this is not a clerical error. This was entire an invalidity, and hence this judgment was in the favor of assessee against the department. So Supreme Court completely cancelled the contention of department. Hope you got my point. All right. So let's continue with the next case law, that is called Dalmia Power Limited 2020. Again, Supreme Court decision. 2020 Supreme Court, that makes it very, very, very important. So the assessee company entered into the scheme of arrangement and amalgamation with effect from 1st January 2015. From 1st January 2015, the assessee company entered into a scheme of amalgamation. Okay, so the transferee company filed original return for assessment year 16-17 under section 139 subsection 1, that means due date for filing income tax return, on 30th September 2016. So the transferee company, okay, the transferee company filed its original return for assessment year 16-17, that means for the previous year 15-16, on 30th September 2016 according to 139 subsection 1. So within the due date itself. So once a scheme got approved by the NCLT, because there was an amalgamation and the scheme got approved by the NCLT. And one more thing you have to note, the amalgamation's effective date was from 1st January 2015. So once NCLT approves this particular amalgamation, then in the previous year 2015-16, this particular amalgamation's effect will come in previous year 15-16. Got my point? Because the effective date was 1st January 2015. So subsequently it got approved by the National Company Law Tribunal. And the transferee company, once the scheme got approved by the NCLT, the transferee company manually filed a revised return for the assessment year 16-17 on November 27, 2018, claiming losses of transferor company as well. So as you know, before this amalgamation got approved by the NCLT, the transferee company filed his original return, right? So once the scheme got approved by the NCLT, the original return has been manually revised by the transferee company, because once the scheme got approved, the transferee company's income or losses should include the income and losses of the transferor as well, because there was an amalgamation. Hope you got my point. Okay. So for making that adjustment, the transferee company filed his revised return for the assessment year 16-17, okay, on 27th November 2018. Okay, so that is the point. So again, the department held that the assessee had belatedly filed the revised return, because as you know, the revised return, the time limit for filing revised return currently is what? Before end of relevant assessment year. So here what happens, assessee filed his belated return or revised return way after the time limit. Okay, so I will illustrate everything once more. So the relevant previous year in question was 2015-16, right? That means assessment year 2016-17. Okay, for this, assessee initially filed a return of income on 30th September 2016 within the due date itself. Got my point? And thereafter, on 1st May 2018, NCLT approved the scheme. So on 1st May 2018, NCLT approved the amalgamation. Once the amalgamation got approved, assessee again revised his return, because that return should have the effect of income or loss of the transferor company as well, right? So on 27th November 2018, that means in the year 18-19, assessee manually filed his revised return to incorporate the adjustment of amalgamation as well. But the department, what do you say? The department held that the assessee had belatedly filed the revised return without obtaining permission from CBDT for continuation of delay, because there is a provision in section 119 subsection 2 clause B for what? For continuation of delay. Okay, say for example, due to genuine hardship, if I'm not able to file my original return or revised return in time, then then the assessee can apply to the commissioner for continuation of delay under 119 subsection 2 clause B. But the assessee in this case haven't gone for any continuation. Simply he manually filed his revised return. So that's why the department has objected the entire revised return. Okay. Now let's go through the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act. Section 139 subsection 5, revised return, as applicable for the year under consideration, permits the assessee to file a revised return he discovers any omission or a mistake in the original return at any time before 1 year from the end of relevant assessment year. Earlier, it was the time limit under section 139 subsection 5 was 1 year from end of relevant assessment year, and currently the time limit, there was an amendment, and currently the time limit is before end of relevant assessment year. Okay, currently the time limit is before end of relevant assessment year. Earlier it was 1 year time limit was there. So the period where this case happened, on that period the time limit was 1 year before end of relevant assessment year. But currently it is end of relevant assessment year. And again 119 2b is applicable in case of a genuine hardship to admit an application, claim by exemption, deduction, refund or any other relief under the Act after the expiry of stipulated period under the Act. As I've told you, under 119 2b, SSE can apply to the commissioner for condown of delay, right? And again there is one more section, 170 subsection 1. It provides that the successor of the SSE shall be assessed in respect of income of the previous year after the date of succession. So once succession happens or amalgamation happens, the successor have to be assessed the income of the predecessor as well. This is what 170 subsection 1 states about. So all these three sections are relevant for understanding this case law in a full-fledged manner. Okay, so let's go and discuss the Supreme Court observations and judgments. Supreme Court observed that the scheme of arrangement and amalgamation between the SSE and the other companies enabled the SSE to file revised return, right? Due to the scheme of arrangement or amalgamation, SSE filed its revised return. And in compliance with the Companies Act 2013, notices intimating arrangements and amalgamation have been sent to the department, and the department had not raised any objection within the stipulated time frame. So according to the Companies Act 2013, on account of amalgamation, before NCLT approves the scheme of amalgamation, the SSE is required to send an intimation to the department, income tax department, all the statutory departments, and the department can make their own representation. They can object with the amalgamation or they can make their own representations. So in this case as well, before approval has been given by the NCLT, the SSE have sent an intimation to the income tax department. And the income tax department, once that intimation has received, income tax department hasn't objected anything. They completely maintained their silence. So that means the income tax department also approves for the amalgamation scheme, right? That's why once the intimation has been sent, department didn't object anything. So that is also observed by the Supreme Court. Again, the Supreme Court held that in the view of section 170 subsection 1, that means predecessor income after amalgamation have to be assessed in the hands of successor, the department was required to receive revised return. So according to 170 subsection 1, Supreme Court noted that the SSE has the benefit. SSE can claim the income or loss of the predecessor once amalgamation has taken place. And section 139 subsection 5 would not apply in this case, since the revised return were not filed by the SSE on account of any omission or wrong statement. So this revised return here in this case is not filed on account of any omission or misstatement or mistake done by the SSE. Okay, in the original return, the delay was due to the time taken to obtain sanction from NCLT, right? Once NCLT approves only, if the NCLT denies that amalgamation, then he cannot take the benefit. So only after approval from the NCLT, SSE can take the benefit of amalgamation. That's why he have waited. So once he got approved from the NCLT, SSE have filed his revised return. It is not on account of rectifying any mistake or omission done by the SSE. That was the observation or the judgment given by the Supreme Court. And again it stated that section 119 would not be applicable where the SSE had restructured its business and filed a revised return of income within prior approval of sanction of NCLT without any objection from the department. Here 119 is also not applicable. Why? Because once amalgamation got approved, before amalgamation got approved, the SSE has sent an intimation to the department. Okay, and the department has at that time department has no objection. Department completely maintained its silence, right? So thereafter, again SSE is not supposed to give an application for condonation of delay. That's what the judgment of Supreme Court in the case of in the case of Dalmia Power Limited 2020, and this is also an important case law. So let's move on with the next case law, that is called Valsad District Central Cooperative Bank Limited 2019 by Gujarat High Court. Again, the SSE claimed deduction under 36 subsection 1 clause 5 in respect of its contribution towards gratuity fund. So SSE has contributed something to a gratuity fund and he started claiming deduction under 36 subsection 1 clause 5. No disallowance was made in respect of such contribution, and the assessment order was passed under 143 subsection 3. Assessment order also approved the scheme. That's why no disallowance was made. Assessment order made by the assessing officer completely approved that particular deduction. Okay. Thereafter, after 4 years, however, the assessing officer issued a notice under 148. Once 4 years has expired, assessing officer issued a 148 notice for invoking reassessment or income escapement assessment under 147. And the contention was the assessee has not disclosed fully, truly all material facts necessary for the assessment. So the contention of department at the time of original assessment, assessee has not disclosed fully and truly all material facts. That's what the contention of assessing officer for invoking 147 proceedings. Since it failed to produce commissioner's order, and what was the default made by the assessee according to the department? It was assessee failed to produce commissioner's order of approval of the gratuity fund for the purpose of claiming deduction. That was the contention of department. So again, I'll explain the case. It is very simple. Assessee filed his return, claimed deduction under 36 subsection 1 for contributing some fund to an approved gratuity fund. So assessment, that particular return has been taken for regular assessment. And on regular assessment, there was no objection from the side of department. So after regular assessment and after the expiry of 4 years, assessing officer want to reopen the case under 147. And the point and the contention of assessing officer for reopening was assessee at the time of original assessment having produced what? Commissioner's order of approval. That means approved, only to approved gratuity fund you can claim a deduction under 36 subsection 1 clause 5. So assessing officer after 4 years says that at the time of original assessment, the assessee has not produced what? Commissioner's order of approval. That commissioner's approval for that gratuity fund. So that has not been produced. That's why I am reopening the case. That was the contention of department. Okay. And again, assessee objected. During the course of original assessment, assessee had produced all the relevant documents towards the fund and the agreement with the LIC to manage the fund. Okay, at the time of original assessment itself, assessee have produced documents pertaining to that contribution towards the fund and the agreement with the LIC to manage the fund, because the LIC is the person who manages that particular fund. So at the time of original assessment, all the relevant documents has been given to the assessing officer. That was the contention of assessee. So it was only after examining these documents, the assessee's claim of deduction was accepted and the reopening of assessment amount to change of opinion by the assessing officer. So that's what the contention of assessee. Assessee says the assessing officer is simply changing his opinion, because at the time of original assessment itself, assessee has produced everything which is asked by the assessing officer, and the assessing officer haven't objected anything. He approved that deduction in the original assessment. Thereafter, he is denying his rejection or denying that deduction, and it is a change of opinion. That's what the contention of assessee. Okay, so that was the debate. Assessing officer says there is an income escapement. Assessee says there is not. It is a change of opinion. And let's understand the relevant provisions of Income Tax Act. So where an assessment under 143 has already been made by the assessing officer for the relevant assessment year, then no action shall be taken under 147 after the expiry of 4 years from the end of relevant assessment year. However, if income escapement is on account of default by the assessee to disclose fully, truly all material facts necessary for his assessment, then AO may invoke proceedings under 147. So this is a relevant provision. It simply says once a regular assessment under 143.3 is completed. Once it has been completed, then and expiry of 4 years has also been done. So after expiry of 4 years, once regular assessment is completed and on expiry of 4 years, assessing officer cannot issue 147. Again, assessing officer cannot invoke reassessment under 147, but he can. When he can invoke, it is like an exception, only subject to one exception. It says, if on regular assessment, assessee having disclosed truly and fully any material facts related to that particular original assessment, then only the assessing officer can invoke a reassessment after expiry of 4 years. This is what the Act says. So simply, once regular assessment is done and the assessee having disclosed all material facts related to that particular assessment, then assessing officer can invoke 147 reassessment or income escapement proceedings even after expiry of 4 years. That's what the Act says. Now let's move on with the judgment here. So the High Court observations and judgment High Court says that merely because the assessee is unable to produce copy of order of approval of gratuity scheme by the commissioner cannot be treated as a failure on part of assessee to disclose truly and fully all material facts, because assessee failed to produce this commissioner's approval. That is correct. But apart from that, assessee has produced everything, and the department having objected in the initial assessment order. Initial assessment, there was no objections raised by the department. Okay, so again at the time of reassessment, department says that the assessee haven't produced commissioner's approval yet, so there is an income escapement. That is not correct. That's what the judgment of observation of High Court. And the assessee had produced the copy of agreement with the LIC and the trustees of the gratuity scheme in course of original assessment. So original assessment, assessee has produced a copy of LIC and the trustees. Okay, hence held that reopening of assessment by issue of notice under 148 is not valid. It was in favor of assessee. Why? Because the High Court said that the assessee initially produced everything. Okay, even after produced everything, the assessing officer approved that particular deduction in original assessment. Thereafter, on expiry of 4 years, the assessing officer again cannot reopen. Okay, because in the initial assessment itself, everything was settled. Again, you cannot reopen that particular case simply stating that one particular document has not been produced by the assessee. That is not, that is not allowed. That's what the contention of High Court in this particular case. Hope you got this particular case law. Okay, so next, let's continue with the next case law. That's called Reham Foundations 2019, Allahabad High Court. Let's understand this case. Assessee trust applied for registration. Assessee applied for a registration. The commissioner rejected the same. Okay, so assessee preferred an appeal before ITAT, that means Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, and got registered. So assessee had applied for a registration under section 12AA of Income Tax Act. Okay, and now this 12AA has been revoked and a new section 12AB has been introduced. Okay, if you are not sure about the 12AB provision, then I've done a separate video on the new provision of 12AB. Please don't forget to watch that. Okay, so from 1st October 2020, this 12AB is applicable. This was an old case law, so 12AA was the registration procedure. So assessee had applied for a registration before commissioner and the commissioner rejected. Assessee have gone to ITAT. ITAT approved that particular registration. So assessee got registered from ITAT. Okay, and the debatable point, the department objected. So an appeal was preferred by the revenue means the department, before High Court. And the debatable point here is whether appellate tribunal has power under 254 subsection 1 to pass an order directing Commissioner of Income Tax to grant registration under 12AA, or it should remand the case to the commissioner for deciding the matter afresh. So what is the debate? It is simple. Whether Income Tax Appellate Tribunal has direct power to approve registration. Approve registration, this was the debate. Or ITAT, once such an appeal comes before ITAT, whether ITAT have to remand the case back to the Commissioner of Income Tax for deciding. Okay, so what exactly is the power of ITAT? That was the debatable point. So whether the ITAT can directly approve a registration, or once such debate comes in, whether ITAT have to remand this case back to Commissioner of Income Tax for a reconsideration, which is correct. That was the debate here. And the High Court observed that circumstances where ITAT can direct a registration of the trust without remanding to Commissioner of Income Tax. So High Court said that in certain circumstances, the Income Tax Appellate Tribunal directly can approve the registration. So that's what the contention of High Court. So those circumstances, let's understand those circumstances where ITAT can directly approve a registration. So where Commissioner of Income Tax has refused to accept an application for registration of trust after recording its finding on the basis of material on record before him, and the appellate tribunal on the basis of the same material on record comes to the conclusion that the Commissioner of Income Tax has misinterpreted the evidence. So in certain circumstances, ITAT can directly approve that particular registration. When an application has been given before Commissioner of Income Tax with all relevant material facts, and the Commissioner of Income Tax misinterpreted that application and rejected that particular registration. In such case, if an assessee prefer an appeal before Commissioner of Income Tax, prefer an appeal before Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, then ITAT can directly allow registration. This was the judgment or observation given by the High Court. And there is an alternative, and it also says there are certain circumstances where ITAT has to remand the case back to CIT. in certain circumstance, ITAT is mandatorily required to give back or remand back that particular case to Commissioner of Income Tax to decide. So let's understand which all are those circumstances. So where an appellate tribunal records such satisfaction on the basis of material or documentary evidence which was not available before Commissioner of Income Tax while exercising his powers under 112, powers under 12AA. It simply says, in certain circumstances, even though an appeal before ITAT is there, ITAT have to remand that case back to Commissioner of Income Tax. Okay. And what all are the circumstances? In circumstance where the assessee, say for example, assessee applied for a registration before Commissioner of Income Tax. He rejected. So the assessee preferred an appeal before ITAT. And before ITAT, the assessee produced the new document which was not available with the Commissioner of Income Tax. If it is so, then ITAT, before deciding, have to remand that case back to Commissioner to decide. So he have to call up the Commissioner, or he have to intimate the Commissioner that a new document or a material has been produced by the assessee. And this have to be considered by the Commissioner of Income Tax itself. So there are two circumstances. Once the same material, same document produced by the assessee to the Commissioner rejected, then ITAT can approve the registration. It is all right. If a new document or a material has been produced before Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, which has not been seen by the Commissioner, then the ITAT before approval has to remand back that case to the Commissioner to decide. Okay, this was the judgment given by the High Court. And in this case, there was no new material or evidence produced by the assessee before ITAT. And hence, the approval or the registration given by ITAT is well valid within the law. So that was, the decision was in favor of assessee in this case. Hope it is clear. Okay, so thank you for watching my video. See you on next video with a part 2 of judicial updates. Take care and bye-bye.